once you're in it, and you've got to go all the way to the end, because you commit yourself to such a level where there is no compromise. You give everything you have, everything, absolutely everything. And sometimes you find even more, because it requires more if you want still to be ahead, if you want to win.
Formula One races cost the lives of dozens of drivers, but the day of the death of one of them was remembered by millions. It was this day that divided the Formula One race into two different eras. On May 1st, 1994, three-time Formula One champion Brazilian Ayrton Senna was killed in a fatal accident at the Italian circuit in Imola. The day before, Austrian racer Ratzenberger dies in qualifying. The Black Weekend claims the lives of two drivers at once and radically changes the approach to safety issues in motorsport. Although Senna's last seconds were witnessed by an unprecedented number of people who watched the fatal accident on air, everything that happened before and immediately after the disaster remained the subject of endless debate. The involvement of several influential parties in the death of the rider at once, and the emotional perception of those fans by the fans from the very beginning rule out an objective approach to the investigation. Rumors and dubious arguments gradually multiplied around the accident, which forever changed the world of racing until the real information was hushed up or destroyed. The law in Italy requires any investigation into any fatal accident, whether it happened in everyday life or on the racetrack. The cause of Ratzenberger's accident is established quite quickly. The case doesn't reach the court. The investigation concludes that it was a tragic combination of circumstances. But as for Senna, the proceeding initiated by the Italian justice eventually dragged on for several years. However, the details of the case weren't widely publicized, as was the trial itself. Perhaps it was most talked about in Italy, whose judiciary was investigating. There is not much information in the English language. British press, often it doesn't contain details and usually ends with phrases that all the accused in the case were acquitted. Although the most famous video to date telling about the Senna accident was originally created in the UK and shown on British Channel 4 in 2001. It was subsequently released on the National Geographic Channel and is now known as the death of Ayrton Senna. But again, there are few details in it, and the position of the Williams team is taken as the basis. In Italy, negligent homicide carries a prison sentence of 6 months to 5 years. But we still can talk about obstructing the investigation, juggling facts, and destroying evidence. Consider also the $33 million paid to Senna's relative by Lloyd's insurance company. But Ayrton cannot be returned. Therefore, today we will try to dive into the chronology of the investigation and the main stage of the investigation in order to understand what really happened then in Imola, based on the case materials, the conclusions of experts, and the position of each of the parties to this process. In 1994, Brazil is waiting for the fourth title from Ayrton. I already talked about the events of the Black Weekend on the channel as a part of the review of the track in Imola. Check it out if you haven't seen it yet. Now I will briefly recall the main points. The most tragic part was that at the beginning of the championship, Ayrton was the main favorite. However, despite the best results in qualifying, the first two races were unsuccessful for him. A turn and a stalled engine at home Interlagos. A poke from Hakkinen and a crash into the first turn on the track in Ida. By itself, the new FW16 devoid of active suspension turned out to be nervous to drive. The ban imposed by the FIA on electronic auxiliary systems affected. You can also watch a video about FIA bans and regulation changes on my channel. At the same time, Michael Schumacher at the Benetton became a formidable force, winning the first two races of the season. Ayrton suspects Benetton are using traction control system in defiance of the ban. However, he wasn't destined to find out whether this was true or not. In Imola, Senna arrives at the first stage of the championship, losing 20 points to Schumacher.
We are here in this third round at the European season, starting now, starting from zero. So basically our championship starts here, 14 races, not 16.
The weekend starts with the crash of Rubens Barrichello in Friday practice. Luckily for him, the injuries weren't serious, and on Saturday during qualifying, dropping out the track at the speed of about 315 km per hour, Roland Ratzenberger dies. The death of the Austrian driver is reported only after he is taken to a hospital in Bologna. The cancellation of the Grand Prix is out of the question, although under Italian law, death during a sporting event requires it to be stopped. At the drivers' briefing on Sunday, Ayrton calls everyone to reorganize the Grand Prix Drivers Association ahead of the next round in Monaco to stand united for increased security measures. The Brazilian starts again from pole position, Schumacher following him. At the start, Pedro Lamy flies into Jurki Yevlechta stalled Benetton. The breakers scatter along the track and beyond. The spectators are injured. Until the end of the fifth lap, the peloton leads the safety car. At the restart, Ayrton and Michael begin to leave the rest. In the course of the sixth lap, the two main contenders are gone pretty tight. Schumacher's car is lighter, 3 pit stops are planned for him, while in Williams they counted on only 2 refueling. And at the beginning of the 7th lap, in a long and fast left corner, Tamburello, Ayrton Senna, as leader of the race, suddenly loses control of the car, goes off the track and crashes into a wall. At the moment of impact, the Brazilian receives fatal head injuries. Arriving at the scene of the accident, doctors notice a weak pulse. By helicopter, Senna is sent to the Maggiore Hospital in Bologna, located 30 kilometers from Imola. The race management receives information that Senna has a very serious head injury, but there is no information in the rest of the paddock. While drops of blood flying from a landing helicopter terrify the people presented at the hospital, the race resumes. The chaos that reigned over the circuit named after Enzo and Dino Ferrari that weekend ends with injuries to the mechanics in the pit lane. The reason was a loose rear wheel from Michele Alboretta's car. Schumacher, Larini and Hakkinen won the San Marino Grand Prix, and only after the end of the broadcast, news about Senna's condition began to appear.
Un sanguinamento importante, aveva il polso regolare, erano condizioni critiche.
When I saw him in the cockpit and we got him out, I realized that his head injury was going to be a fatal head injury.
Doutora Maria Teresa Fiandre, o estado do paciente é muito grave. Sofreu um trauma muito grande no crânio com fraturas múltiplas. Está em estado de coma profundo. Tinha sofrido também diversas paradas cardíacas.
Devo solo dire che gli accertamenti elettroencefalografici che abbiamo terminato 5 minuti fa purtroppo confermano quella che era stata la diagnosi clinica di morte cerebrale.
Ma non resta più alcuna speranza?
No, purtroppo nessuna speranza.
Da un punto di vista neurologico vi è completa assenza dei riflessi del tronco cerebrale e l'elettroencefalogramma eseguito mezz'ora fa ha dimostrato assenza completa di attività elettrica cerebrale. Di fronte a questi parametri clinici elettroencefalografici noi dobbiamo porre diagnosi di coma irreversibile.
Purtroppo il comunicato stampa che avevamo preannunciato per le 9 possiamo farlo adesso perché alle 18:40 è cessata anche l'attività cardiaca. Quindi è comparsa isoelettrica, che vuol dire assenza di qualunque attività cardiaca, e abbiamo constatato il decesso.
On the evening of May 1st, Ayrton's body leaves the hospital and is transported to the Institute of Forensic Medicine. The shock of the tragedy rose simultaneously with the wave of indignation. The Italian press is pondering why the arrest went on when it was clear that injury was fatal. It assumes that the organizers delayed the announcements, both in case of Roland and of Ayrton, in order to avoid the forced cancellation of the sporting event, thereby protecting their financial interests. We see not only vivid images in the magical world of Formula One, but often cynical relationships. Horror and outrage reign in the headlines of all the news. On Monday, May 2nd, the President of the Italian Republic, Oscar Luigi Scalfari, immediately contacted the Minister of Justice to find out what initiatives the judiciary had taken in connection with the events in Imola. On the same day, a telephone call from the minister to the Attorney General of Bologna launches an investigation into the double incident of the deaths of Roland Ratzenberger and Ayrton Senna. Oscar Luigi Scalfari sent an official fax to the President of Brazil. This tragedy saddened me and the millions of people who admired Senna in Italy and around the world. In this regard, I want to convey my condolences to you. The judicial authorities in Bologna have already initiated an investigation process. I'm very sorry that after such a disaster, the race wasn't interrupted. The official investigation is headed by prosecutor Maurizio Passerini, who was handed a document outlining the plan of action and the main stage of the investigation. Passerini immediately gets to work. The track in Imola was arrested. The cars of Ratzenberger and Senna were taken under guard. On May 3rd, by order of the prosecutor's office, the pilot's bodies are autopsied at the Institute of Forensic Medicine. Senna morning, Ratzenberger afternoon. The result showed that both received fatal injuries at the time of the accident. After that, even more questions appeared to the race management and medical authorities. Accusation went down as the resuscitation procedures carried out with Ayrton were more in the interest of the race organizers, because the management understood the gravity of the situation. Officially, the death of Senna was announced after the race, but the Brazilian could have died from injuries on the track. Professor of the Aporto Institute of Medicine, José Eduardo Pinto da Costa, suspected that the resuscitation team in Imola resorted to euthanasia, that is, artificially supported the life of already deceased Senna, so that the race wouldn't be stopped and the organizers would not suffer losses. However, according to the Italian law, follows the fact that if the heart continues to beat, then doctors are required to maintain life support. Therefore, at the same time, according to the doctors, the medical staff did everything right, realizing that the driver's heart was still beating. The rescue team couldn't think of anything else but to provide assistance and immediately send the victim to the hospital. On the same day, Senna's body leaves the forensic examination building on a plane specially provided by the Italian government. He is sent to Paris to Charles de Gaulle Airport, where he is transferred to a flight of Brazilian airline, ready to go home, accompanied by his younger brother Leonardo, friends and close journalists. After 12 hours of flight, in early morning of May 4th, the plane appears over the runway of the airport in São Paulo. Ayrton's coffin, covered with the Brazilian flag on the fire truck, accompanied by a guard of honor, makes a 30-kilometer journey to the city center. where a farewell ceremony was organized in the building of the local legislative assembly. The total number of people who came out to see Senna on his last journey is estimated at several million. The whole family were next to Ayrton. Brazilian President Itamar Franco declared 3 days of mourning in the country, canceled all official meetings and also attended the ceremony. 15 former and current Formula One drivers, team leaders Ron Dennis and Frank Williams arrived in São Paulo. "I feel terrible," says Williams. "It's gonna be hard for everyone to forget this dumb weekend. But you have to understand that we are the first to want to find out as soon as possible what happened to Senna's car." On May 5th, Ayrton Senna was buried at the Morumbi Cemetery in São Paulo. In Brazil arrived the head of Formula One, Bernie Ecclestone, but he was denied participation in the ceremony. The Brazilian racer's family blames the organizers of the championship. The family blames the championship organizers for the fact that there was not enough protection on the track. 3 days after the accident, journalist Roberto Cabrini called Ecclestone at the FIA building in Paris and asked if it was true that he said the phrase, "Ayrton is dead," immediately after the incident. Ecclestone replied that he had misunderstood the information coming from the doctors via radio. The word "head" sounded like dead to him. After 10 minutes, he hastened to apologize to Leonardo. Ecclestone shows effects from Bologna, stating that Senna's death was pronounced at 6:40 p.m., 4 hours after being sent to the hospital. When asked if he was aware of the autopsy result, which says that the fatal injury was received at the time of impact, Ecclestone replied that at that time no one had told him anything specific about the driver's condition. At the same time, he was getting all the information he needed to make sure the race went ahead. On May 6th, in the hall of the crematorium in Salzburg, they said goodbye to Roland Ratzenberger. The farewell was attended by the drivers Frentzen, Wendlinger, Lauda, Berger and Hebert, who had just arrived from Brazil, as well as teammate David Brabham and FIA President Max Mosley. After the San Marino Grand Prix, prosecutor Maurizio Passarini organized investigative work. An initial examination of the remains of the cars was carried out. In the cockpit of William Senna, a folded Austrian flag was found, which the Brazilian expected to raise at the finish line in memory of Ratzenberger. On the road sealed by the police in Imola, the inspection of road surface and the accident site is being carried out. The prosecutor's office asked to provide all video recording from the scene, as well as electronic control units from the cars of Senna and Ratzenberger. It turns out that the team engineers removed them and took with them immediately after the race. TV programs have begun to analyze episodes of accidents on the track and are trying to understand if they have a common cause. In the editorial office of the Italian edition of Autosprint, The Ballerines, former Formula One driver Gabriele Turquini asked to take a closer look at the published photos taken at the scene of the accident by publication staff photographer Angela Orsi. In particular, at the steering wheel lying next to the car. It didn't look at all habitually removed from the steering column. It lay with a broken-off fragment of the steering column. At first, it was assumed that the column was cut off by rescuers during the evacuation of the driver. But during the interview of witnesses, it turned out that none of those who arrived at the scene of the incident committed such actions. It was already broken, and this form lay on Senna's knees. From that moment on, the version that a breakdown of steering column could lead to an incident becomes working. May 12. In the British press, there is a mention from the head of Formula 1, Bernie Ecclestone. The death of Senna is a tragic accident. The driver was killed by a detached front wheel. The president of the International Automobile Federation, Max Mosley, echoes his words while speaking in defense of Imola's concrete walls. The same report suggested that Senna wouldn't have been injured if the front wheel had gone 10 centimeters to the side or above his head. According to experts, the contact of the car with the wall occurs at not very large, but as turned out, very unfortunate angle of 22 degrees, which actually looks like this. At the same time, speed at the time of collision is huge, 211 km per hour according to telemetry, 216 according to the calculation of the prosecution experts. The front right wheel, having hit the wall, is preparing to converge on the open part of the cockpit. Ayrton in turn moves toward a fatal blow. For a moment the wheels are right between the cockpit and the wall. The black rubber mark marks the contact area. One of the elements of the front suspension fixed on the wheel, bending in the direction of the driver's head, passes to the very edge of the upper vulnerable part of the helmet, under the sealing gum, and penetrates Senna's head. The helmet is strongly affected by the metal elements of the front wheel suspension, which at the same moment soars up, and Williams is applied to the concrete with his rear wheel. The blow, which seemed to take place on a tangent, nevertheless turned out to be quite dense. The cockpit on the right side cracked, and on the left it completely dispersed along the entire height of the wall. A concrete wall 20 cm thick moved slightly away from the contact area. On May 17, Maurizio Pasarini appoints a group of experts appraisers who, within 2 months, had to provide the investigation with their findings about the incidents. Among them there are sports and road specialists, representatives of the traffic police, forensic experts, scientists from the University of Bologna, former Formula 1 engineers Mauro Fornieri and Tommaso Carletti, ex-driver Emanuele Pirro. They are joined by Williams engineer Giorgio Stirano, as well as 3 experts appointed by Sagis. In relation to manslaughter hypothesis, 9 members of the Williams team initially appear, including Frank Williams himself. 5 people from the Simtech team, including the owner and technical director of the team, Nick Wirth, as well as 2 Sagis executives, promoters of race in Imola, and the director of the Autodrome. On May 18, Pasarini received a Renault engine control unit, also known as a data logging unit, that served as a black box on Senna's car. It turns out that over the past 2+ weeks, the block has been reused by Renault's sports department. For this reason, the data containing the testimony of the 7th lap of the San Marino Grand Prix was first copied to a laptop computer, and then transferred to a floppy disk and transferred to the judicial system in this form. At the same time, the second control unit installed by Williams engineers, according to the team, was broken. On May 25, Pasarini, together with the appointed experts, examined the remains of the car, making a photographic selection. George Serrano, Patrick Head, as well as Charlie Whiting, accompanied by a group of FIA technicians, are present at the inspection. At the same time, C. Promo, appointed by the prosecutor, is inspecting Imola's pavement, and Sarita Company is doing topographic work. As for Ratzenberger accident, the Simtech team's engineers immediately pointed out the telemetry data to the investigation. They showed that on his previous lap, Roland drove a greater distance than usual. This proved that the Austrian driver went off the track and apparently returned to it, damaging the front wing, which then couldn't withstand a large aerodynamic load, broke and fell under the front wheel of the car between the Tamburello and Villeneuve turns. As a result, the driver lost control at speed of 314.9 kilometers per hour. A little later, there were also photos showing Ratzenberger return to the track through the curb in Tosa. Initially, Pasarini asked for investigation into Nick Berta and his subordinates, but ultimately decides not to file a case against the Simtek team. Ratzenberger's accident was due to damage to the car from driving off the track, not a design or construction error. Later in his interview, Adrian Newby tells that the mechanics of the Simtek Ford turned to him the day before for advice on how to fix the wing, to which Adrian replies, "I couldn't help them without knowing Simtek's wing design. I told them it was the work of their designer, Nick Wirth." When asked where he was, Moody replied that he had gone to a gala dinner. The next day, Roland Ratzenberger crashed due to a broken front wing. But this won't change the investigative decision in any way. During the investigation after that, Williams repeatedly made conflicting statements about Senna's accident. At present, the team has decided to refuse any comments on this topic, although back in early 2000 a documentary film was made with the participation of the popular science channel National Geographic. In it, the creators refuted the version with the steering fellow using telemetry data and video recordings provided by the English team. However, at the end of June, the dean of the Faculty of Engineering at the University of Bologna, Professor Enrico Lorenzini, informed Pasarini of his findings. Under his leadership, laboratory studies of the steering column of William Senna were carried out at the Institute of Metallurgy, and it turned out that it was originally modified. The original tube, which forms the base of the column, was cut off at the junction of the bracket. A new element was added to it in the form of a tube of a smaller diameter, which was fixed on both sides by welding. According to Professor Lorenzini's report, the weld caused premature fatigue failure of the material of the new column element near the weld, which, in his opinion, led to the fact that the driver lost control of the machine. It was poorly welded and couldn't withstand the stress of the race. We found fatigue cracks near the seam on the rod itself. There were also 2 marks on the bar. Someone was trying to smooth the joint after welding. It seemed that the work was done in a hurry. I believe the column was defective. It probably cracked during training, and a few months before the accident only a small piece remained, connecting the 2 parts together. Therefore, the car didn't react to the turn. Studies conducted using an electron microscope revealed signs of obvious metal fatigue at the break point. On June 28, all the specialists involved in the investigation, as well as Williams engineers, were invited to the Institute of Metallurgy. On the microscope screen, they were shown the characteristic traces of metal fatigue. The source of crack propagation was initially located in the upper crescents of the tube. The examination showed that 70% of the circumference had signs of fatigue failure even before the accident. In this place, there were traces of friction and cyclic stress between the 2 parts. The results were similar to those of another examination conducted early in the military aerospace laboratory of Practic de Mara. Experts appointed by the Williams team confirmed signs of fatigue, but disagree with the percentage. They estimated that only 35% of the circumference had fatigue cracks, while 65% continued to hold the load. The column, in their opinion, retained sufficient strength until the moment it hit the wall. 2.5 months after Senna's death, in the final of the World Cup, the Brazilian national team beat Italy in a penalty shootout, winning their 4th league title. After the match, celebrating the victory, the Brazilian players unfurled a banner reading, "Senna, we accelerate together. The 4th title is ours." By this time, Pasarini had questioned Patrick Head, who was already under investigation, as well as Damon Hill, who was driving the second car for the Williams team. In early autumn, on September 9, before the start of the Italian Grand Prix weekend, the prosecutor goes to Monza, where he arranges a meeting with the chief designer of Williams, Adrian Newey, whom he is still interviewing as a witness. The FIA in 1993 rewrote the rules again, banning most electronic systems: ABS, traction control, active suspension, two-way telemetry between the car and the boxes. Just in case, the automatic transmissions were also outlawed. Although then the automatic gearbox that could be put on the racing car simply didn't exist. Williams' team seemed to be most affected by these changes. During pre-season testing, Ayrton told to Ratzenberger about his Williams handling problems. Going into Brazilian GP, Williams also had an aerodynamic problems. So, before San Marino GP, Williams brought some modification for their car, by Ayrton's word.
The team is conscious about the challenge we have to make to recover the ground over Benetton, as well the technical development that we must be able to do to improve our car performance.
Probably one of these modifications was the steering column. It turns out that the steering column modification was done by engineers in response to Senna's request for a little more handroom in the cockpit. In McLaren, the Brazilian got used to free position of the hands. The steering was located high there, and the steering wheel familiar to him was about 30 centimeters in diameter. Williams, in contrast, used a low steering position. The steering wheel was hidden behind the walls of the cockpit and was of a smaller diameter. Ayrton wanted to have a familiar steering wheel, but it wasn't possible to increase it. To do this, it would be necessary to change the design of the car. But as far as handroom is concerned, here the engineers are trying to slightly change the position of the steering. Adrian Newey, in his book How to Build a Car, writes: he was cramped in the cockpit, his hands rubbed against the inner walls. He wanted the steering wheel a little lower to have more hand clearance. It was necessary to move the steering wheel down a couple of millimeters, but we had to keep in mind the provisions of the FIA rules. Article 13 of the 1994 Formula 1 technical regulation describes the requirements for the dimension of the interior of the cockpit. A free vertical and cross section having a minimum width and height of 25 cm with a maximum corner radius of 5 cm must be supported along the entire length of the cockpit with the steering wheel removed. Representatives of the FIA using a template in the form of an aluminum plate could at any time place it inside in the cockpit and draw it along the entire length to the pedals. If it got stuck somewhere, then the car would be recognized as not compliant with the rules. Trying to lower the steering column, the engineer realized that they didn't fit into the regulations. If we just lowered the steering wheel, we wouldn't pass the test. We did the following: locally reduce the diameter of the steering column by 4 mm. At the same time, Pasarini receives a video cassette with a recording made by an onboard video camera located on Senna's car. He wonders why the video footage took so long to reach him. After all, Frank Williams had it just a few days after the accident. In January 1995, a group of experts from the University of Bologna, headed by Lorenzini, formalized their work into an official report of 600 pages and handed it over to Pasarini. It follows from it that the accident occurred due to a breakdown of the modified steering column. In February, Pasarini submits reports on the incident of Senna and Ratzenberger to the Bologna District Attorney's office. After that, he sends a report with a request to bring charges against the members of the Williams team, as well as the track management. Difficulties that arose in the process of collecting evidence, studying reports, as well as numerous rechecks of the examination delays the decision-making process. Only by summer of 1996, Pasarini completes his own 700-page report and submits it to the court of the city of Imola. At the end of November, 2.5 years after the death of Senna, the Italian prosecutor receives permission to charge 6 people with manslaughter. The team leader and owner, Frank Williams, technical director and co-owner Patrick Head, Williams' chief engineer Adrian Newey, and the head of Sagis, Imola circuit manager Federico Bendinelli, circuit director Giorgio Poggi, and Roland Bruncerada, the race director, should appear before the court. Manslaughter in Italy carries a penalty of 6 months to 5 years in prison. The accusations against Williams are based around poorly executed steering column modification. In particular, Williams failed to adequately assess the forces that were involved in the operation of this modification. The small diameter section was at a point subject to heavy loads. The joint between the section had insufficient radius. The material of the tube in the small diameter section was inferior to the original, and 2 marks left on the parts reduced its strength. Poggi, Bendinelli and Bruncerada are accused of allowing the race to take place on a track that doesn't have the required relegation zones, violating safety regulations. Bendinelli is accused of not changing Tamburello's turn, which everyone considered dangerous. Giorgio Poggi and Roland Bruncerada were accused of not making the necessary changes to the circuit safety system after the death of Ratzenberger, and the circuit management claims that both incidents were an accident, and that the high speed of modern Formula One are to blame. Williams denied the accusation against them from very beginning. According to the team, the steering column broke at the moment of hitting the wall, and this was already a consequence of the accident. It wasn't its cause. Williams is disappointed with the content of the allegations. We don't consider the accusation well-founded and intend to do everything to defend our position. Adrian Newey. 2.5 years after the accident, prosecutor Maurizio Pasarini decided that there was no reason to prosecute the Simtek team, but brought charges of manslaughter against the leaders of the Williams team and the track management. The fact that the Ratzenberger case was so quickly hidden on the table led me to believe that Pasarini's main motivation was personal fame. The board of Formula One took the news of charges ambiguously. Flavio Briatore questioned the holding of races in Italy. If someone is convicted in Italy for the death of Senna, it will be a big problem. I wouldn't take risk of bringing my team to a country where you could be blamed for an accident. Fatality is a part of the game. Ken Tyrrell. Auto racing is a dangerous sport. The rider going to the start consciously takes risks. On the part of British observers, Italian justice is reproached of delaying the investigation, lack of understanding of technical nuances, and a great desire to find at least someone to blame. The Guardian newspaper. Motor racing in Italy has seen many deaths. The law says there must be an investigation, but so far no one has even been sent to jail. Max Mosley hinted that the World Council would be forced to take action if the accused were found guilty. In fact, Italy was threatening with a boycott on holding competition on its territory. The message from the British press caused a backlash in the Apennine Peninsula. The newspaper Dello Sport in Italy protects a dead person under the same law as a living person. If the British never come to the race in Italy or Monza or Imola again, so be it. Formula One will suffer from this much more than our civilized society. Formula One is a dangerous sport. The public, including in Italy, recognize this type of activity, as well as any other sports and recreational activities of public interest. But when the race takes place in Italy, it falls under local legislation, which requires investigation and compliance with the letter of the law. And if it wasn't just a danger factor that led to the death of a person, but some of the negligence which manifested itself within the system, then responsibility should be established as in ordinary life. Frank Williams. I will go to Imola and I will protect my company. This is my job. The law in Italy is above everything else and we must respect it. The opening of the Senna trial was scheduled for 20 February 1997 at the Imola court. 4 days before the start of the process, an article prepared by Peter Winsell, a well-known British journalist and associate of Frank Williams, appears in the application of the British edition of the Sunday Times. In 2014, he spoke in detail about this publication on his YouTube channel. The article focused on a photo showing a small blue object lying on the pavement in front of Senna's car at the start of the lap. The author speculated that it was a piece of Jyrki Jyvälähtä's Benetton car left over from a crash at the start, and that Senna's car was vulnerable to this kind of debris because the tire pressure was still low. The picture was taken by a French photographer and given to the Williams team at the time. The photo was supposed to be used in court by the defense. Adrian Newey. A fragment of this size could easily cause a slow puncture. It could cause the car to sag, and this in turn could lead to the demolition of the rear of the car due to loss of traction. The front and rear right tires were completely destroyed in the accident, so it was impossible to study them and say for sure. The back of the car skidded, and this is confirmed by all telemetry data. After that, Ayrton dropped the gas by half, as if he was trying to catch the rear axle, and half a second later he abruptly applied to the brake. A slow rear tire puncture can indeed cause an oversteer effect, but in this case the race car will behave very differently from news description. The car could change its movement so abruptly only if the slow puncture abruptly outgrew into real one. A slow puncture of the rear wheel would result in oversteer, as the front wheels would then have more grip than the rears. And such departure with slow puncture of rear wheel could only occur in the event of a correction when catching the car. As an example here is the accident of Daniel Kvyat at British Grand Prix 2020, when it was the rear right that couldn't stand the Russian at AlphaTauri. The car jerked sharply to the left and turned into a bump stop. So, in the situation you is talking about, Senna's car should have swerved inside to turn to left, but instead it went straight into the wall. Later we will see more evidences in cars' behavior with tire failure. And yet, in the 94, tire workers are given to study the rubber from Senna's car. Barry Griffin. We analyzed the Williams rear wheel and actually found a cut, but damage of this nature caused an instant sag in the rubber, which the driver immediately warns. Everyone knew that Senna was too experienced a driver not to understand that something was wrong with his car. It's not. That cut in rubber happened after hitting the wall, not before. Goodyear gives the police its opinion a month after the Imola race. The damage of Senna's tires was formed at the moment of hitting the wall and is the result of an accident. Maurizio Passarini, answering reporters' question about the Sunday Times publication, said, "The photo doesn't matter. Even assuming that this object could have had an impact, the prosecution focused on their conclusion that identified a broken steering column as the cause of Senna's accident." In the same article, another version is given. The Brazilian driver could have lost consciousness during the race. One of McLaren's employers who worked near to Senna and previously said that sometimes when he was under pressure wanted to drive a perfect circle, he could hold his breath. I think it sharpens his senses. As confirmation, the fact is given that at the moment of lost control, the frames from the onboard camera show how the driver's head tilts sharply to the left, presumably due to loss of consciousness. However, this theory was quickly discarded. The movement of the head was the result of a sharp drop in lateral G-forces at the moment when the car suddenly deviated from the racing trajectory. Telemetry data indicated a sharp increase in longitudinal G-forces, as well as signs of braking in the departure zone indicated that Senna applied the brakes and was conscious. Prior to the 94 season, Ayrton was heavily involved in physical training and underwent a full medical examination. The case file contains certification confirming the excellent physical condition of the Brazilian. Later, already during the trial, when the experts announce the results of autopsy, they will also tell the court that Senna's blood test indicated the excellent health of the rider and the complete absence of prohibited substances. The same report states that his bell helmet met all specifications. The publication of the Sunday Times with new theories quickly spread to other publications. But all these theories, which according to the British experts were supposed to remove the blame from Williams, or at least strengthen the position of the defense, didn't affect the course of the process. On February 20, 1997, the trial begins in Imola. The local courtroom was too small. For this reason, Judge Antonio Costanzo moved the hearing to the Palazzo de' Cercoli in advance. A small hall for dancing parties and social events was specially converted for this process. Above the judge's head is the inscription, "The law is the same for all." Despite Frank Williams' latest statement, neither he nor the other team members accused in the case were presented in the opening of the trial. Frank will appear here only in the fall, after the end of the racing season, and will answer questions himself before the court. And Patrick Head and Adrian Newley plan to attend the trial only as observers, exercising their right not to answer questions in the courtroom. The interests of the accused are represented mainly by their lawyers. The Italian lawyer Arresto Dominioni will defend the British team in court. The agreement reached before the start of the process was announced by the team's lawyers Peter Goodman and another Italian Roberto Causa, who had previously worked with Williams, wished to protect in the interest of Roland Brunzerada and the leaders of the track. Italian lawyer Giovanni Carcatera, representing the Senna family, was present at the meeting as an observer and said that the race's relatives would closely monitor the trial, but wouldn't act as a plaintiff. The collected accusation and case materials, reports and experts' opinions include several thousand pages. The debate of the parties take place here for 9 months until the end of November 1997. During this time, the court held 31 sessions, heard more than 50 witnesses and experts. Only Federico Bandinelli, the manager of Sagis, was present at the very first hearing of the 6 defendants. Before the trial began, Bandinelli told reporters that no one should be held responsible for this accident, but in Italy criminal investigations are mandatory and there is a risk that all racing in our country will be banned if we are convicted. The circuit at Imola, also known as the Enzo Dino Ferrari circuit, has hosted the Formula One Championship since 1980. Built back in 1950, the circuit had a fast and fluid configuration, despite the subsequent changes and the addition of several chicanes. Imola was still quite fast and dangerous, especially at the start of the lap. Acceleration from the starting straight after a few seconds at full speed sent the drivers into the left long turn called Tamburello from the park area, located on the left along the Santerno River, leaping to the limits of the circuit on the right, followed by another short straight and the right bend Villeneuve, bringing cars to stop in Tosa. Keke Rosberg. Tamburello wasn't such a hard turn. Going into it, you just hang on the trajectory for a while. It has never been a place where a driver, especially like Senna, would have gone down due to a mistake. However, here we are afraid that something would go wrong, since there was no protection in the regulation zone. Jackie Stewart. It doesn't take much skill to get through this corner, so it's unthinkable that Ayrton could make a mistake here. During the years of the Formula One round, 4 dangerous incidents occurred in the Tamburello corner. In 1987, after a punch in the rear left tire, Nelson Piquet went off the here with a concussion. In 1989, Ratzenberger, due to damage to the front wing, leaves the track in a straight line and crashes into a wall. His Ferrari bursts into flames. The Austrian passes out and gets burned. In 1991, the collapse of the front wing caused the accident of Michele Alboreto. The impact slightly injured his leg. Finally, in 1992, Riccardo Patrese's crash was caused by a right rear tire puncture. The Italian received a concussion. In the event of damage to the front wing, the cars left the track straight, and in the event of loss of pressure in one of the rear wheels, a sharp turn occurred. All these accidents were shown in the court. Pasarini not only tried to show how cars behave in this place in the event of this or that damage, but also drew the main conclusion: all accidents in the Tamburello were caused by mechanical failures. Pierluigi Martini believes that this turn could have been a problem either in wet condition or if there was a technical problem. In the case of Ayrton, from the very beginning there is an assumption about the unstable behavior of the car due to a combination of two factors: the tires that have cooled down behind the safety car and the roughness of the asphalt.
It's a dangerous corner because if you have a failure in the car, it was the wall very close in the high-speed part of the track. But I'm sure, because I know, because I had the same crash that Ayrton had in the same place, I know that you can go out in this corner only if you have a mechanical failure on the car.
During the years of the competition in Imola, the roadbed began to require repair. Trying to improve the situation, after the race of '93, the organizers carried out another series of measures to improve the road surface locally. Patches in the form of stripes of new asphalt appeared on several sections of the route, including Tamburello. Passing over them at a minimum height, the cars carved fountains of sparks, hitting the bottom of the surface. Tamburello is a long and high-speed turn. The drivers drove it at full throttle. But despite the great length, it also has the characteristic points of the racing trajectory. It has an entry point, where the driver, being on the outside of the track, begins to turn the steering wheel. The geometric apex is a recommending arc, but still the turn has its apex in terms of the racing trajectory. At this point, the car is as close as possible to the inner edge of the track, after which the driver again directs the car to the outer edge, to the exit point. There were 4 stripes of new asphalt in Tamburello. The longest of them, third, was in the most critical phase of the turn. At the same time, its inner part had a pronounced unevenness. Williams' engineer insists that Ayrton lost control while overcoming these bumps on cold tires. Most riders, including Damon Hill, choose a wider line here to avoid bumps. Ayrton, on the contrary, often directs the car inward, knowing about these bumps and, as it were, deliberately attacking them, being able to go along the inner radius and turn faster.
I think the car is just a bit quicker, but it's still very hard to drive. Very hard, very steep over the environment.
Michael Schumacher acted in a similar way here. It can be seen that the German also turned the steering wheel slightly to the left, approaching the transition to a strip of a new asphalt, in order to straighten the wheels a little on bumps and have more stability. However, after Senna's accident, Michael, like everyone else, stayed away from the inside line. From the gestures of Schumacher and Hill, who were waiting for the restart of the race, one can understand what the drivers have in mind when discussing the possible cause of the accident. Williams' lawyer Aristide Mignoni voiced the team's theory to the court that the accident was caused by poor road conditions combined with cold tires. The lawyer also stated that the investigation didn't conduct proper tests on the surface of the track after the race. The Mignoni refers to an amateur footage film on March 9, 1994, during pre-season testing at Imola. The footage of Ayrton Senna, combined by Bendinelli and Poggi, inspects the asphalt in Tamburello, discussing the condition of the track. The Brazilian points out to the track management the pronounced steps at the transition points of the old asphalt to a new one and urges them to solve the problem. Ayrton Senna. The Tamburello has 3 or 4 steps that make the car hit the ground. There is a risk of losing control here. I hope you do something. The next day, specially called technical services undertook to correct the problem, after which the FIA representatives present in Imola approved the track for the San Marino Grand Prix. Federico Bendinelli. The job was done with a grinder the day after Senna's report. Ayrton told us he was pleased. He no longer felt those bumps that he noticed. I think the real problem is elsewhere. He had an unstable car, as he himself said. Even he had difficulties in driving. Lawyers from the highway management said that numerous checks and inspections were carried out by specialists. Passarini added the prosecution expert considered this theory, and all aspects of the track were studied, and everyone knew that the bottom of the car was in contact with the asphalt surface in this turn. After that, the prosecutor summoned Pierluigi Martini, who knew the track well and took part in that fateful race, to testify. A driver like Senna would not have left the track at this point if there were no problems with the car. The effect of hitting the bottom was completely normal. This effect is observed on all race tracks. It wasn't possible to completely avoid bumps in Tamburello, so we just had to keep our trajectory. Michele Albaretta. Imola was no different from other tracks. We raced in much worse conditions. Those bumps couldn't make Senna's car go off the road. Williams' line of defense was built among other things around the theory of cold tires. According to the team, while driving at low speed behind the safety car, Ayrton's tire cooled down, the pressure in the wheels decreased, and the car sank. This aggravated the problem of friction between the bottom and the asphalt and led to the fact that the airflow under it disappeared and ceased to create the necessary downforce. Williams. The rear wheel slipped. Ayrton reacted by turning the steering wheel in the opposite direction, and after that the car went straight. In similar circumstances, for example, Charles Leclerc found himself at the Italian Grand Prix in Monza 2020. After the restart, the Ferrari went off in the long right turn of the parabolic due to the demolition of the rear axle. However, Passarini reports that at least 9 cars hit the bottom of the asphalt in the Tamburello. He notes that in the lap before losing control in the same place, Senna's car cuts more sparks than immediately before the accident. At the same time, the Schumacher car following him is taller and lighter, and doesn't touch the pavement so much. Visually, Senna's car stands on all 4 wheels. Sparks under the bottom appear only in those places where there were bumps. This disapproved another version of a possible breakdown of the suspension. Mauro Fornieri. It was originally talking about the rear suspension and tires, but these hypotheses were immediately discarded because the car wouldn't have been able to achieve such deceleration when braking and maintain this exit line. Otherwise, given the strong deceleration, the car began to rotate due to an imbalance in the braking forces. Tommaso Carletti. According to traffic police data and analysis of television images, Senna's car was driving straight ahead, deviating 9 degrees from the cornering path, and after 121 meters, covered in 1/610 of a second. It crashed into a wall at a speed of 210 to 220 km per hour at an angle of about 22 degrees. Challenging the theory of cold tires, the prosecutor asked one of the appointed experts to report the lap time of Ayrton Senna. Stefani Stefanini. On the 6th lap of the restarted race, with the car still full of fuel, Senna clocked minute 24 and 887,000 of a second. This is a very good lap time. Only 2 riders then managed to improve it, Damon Hill and Michael Schumacher. Pierluigi Martini. Senna's lap times before the crash indicated that his tires were fully formed up. The main complaint from the prosecutor in relation to the track in Imola was formulated in relation to the so-called safety zone. Passerini informs the court that the surface on the track isn't the same plane as the curb. The asphalt in the Tamburello rises in the direction of the curb. This causes a small springboard effect because the concrete safety zone didn't follow this upward principle and was more horizontal. Marcello Gentili. There was an angle of 21 cm between the track and the shoulder, and there were intermediate brake marks on the concrete itself. Stefani Stefanini. Left tire marks 38 meters before the track curved to the left and ran parallel a meter from the wall. 6 meters abrasions on a grassy area. On the right side, the tire track was 47 meters and the grass was less noticeable. Antonio Del Monte. The average slope of the track is 3.1 of a person. The average slope in the departure zone is 2.1. There was no way to slow down in the Tamburello, as prescribed by the rules. There wasn't enough space to slow down the car. The concrete zone appeared here in 1989 after the request of Alan Prost, who then represented the interest of the drivers. Before that, there was ordinary grass in front of the wall. The lane of concrete was to allow riders to maneuver in emergency situations. According to the conclusion of the prosecution, while on track, Senna's car slowed down with a force of 4.6 g. But when switching to concrete, the deceleration dropped to 2 g. Maurizio Passerini. When Senna lost control of the car, he was driving at 310 km per hour. While trying to brake, the driver crashed into the wall at 216 km per hour. If the surface was perfectly flat, his braking ability would have been much higher and the speed could have been reduced to 140 km per hour. Senna paid the price for these circumstances. The track management says that if the roadside was also raised up, then during rain all the water would fall onto the track. But this justification doesn't mean anything for the prosecution. Other solution must obviously be used to drain the water. After that, Sergis Lower provided the court with his own reconstruction. According to their submission, he hit the wall hard at speed of 188 km per hour compared to 216 km per hour, calculated by experts for the prosecution. Under ideal conditions, contact with the wall would occur at a speed 167 km per hour instead of 140 km per hour. But in this case, in their opinion, the front right wheel of the car would hit Senna's head with enough force to kill. Federico Bendinelli. Article 7, Appendix of the FIA 94 Rule Book states that the road must be delimited along its entire length by two zones at least 3 meters wide on both sides without changing the level. For tracks built before 1991, a 12-degree slope is allowed. The difference between the track and the roadside is 2 degrees, that is, 10 degrees above the maximum allowable. The consequences of each of the incidents in the Tamburello in past years were caused precisely by hitting the wall. The expansion of the security zone in this place was hindered by the natural landscape.
I went with close to 300 k's just straight on into the beton wall, and just for a miracle, everything exploded. I was on fire. It was just for a miracle I survived. And I remember well, I've been in the hospital, and Ayrton found me in the hospital, and I say, when I'm back to Imola, we should go to this wall, because this wall, it's really terrible. And you are so fast, and if you get into this wall, it's just difficult to survive. And the next test, we've been in Imola, Ayrton and myself walked to this corner, to my place where we had the accident, and we looked to move the wall. And we looked behind the wall, and behind the wall is a small river. And we looked both each other and say, we cannot move it because behind is a river. And we left again. And I think 5 meters from this place where we stand and discussed this, he died.
Roberto Nazete, who managed the track in the 80s, said that the wall at Tamburello met all standards. It was made of elastic cement and designed to take an impact at an angle not exceeding 30 degrees. In Senna's case, the angle was 22 degrees. After the tragedy at Imola, FIA President Max Mosley was one of the first to speak out in defense of the concrete walls that limit the track. Concrete walls are permitted for use when the angle of potential contact is small. In such cases, there is no danger of a sharp slowdown. The wall is dangerous only in those places where the angle of impact is very large. In this case, tar barriers are used. The drivers had no complaints about the walls of Imola, and the experience of many accidents indicated that there were no serious injuries. The death of Senna is a tragic accident. It was caused by a front wheel hitting the head. Roland Brunziade granted the court a license issued to the circuit in 1994. Any bureaucratic machinations through which Imola obtained its license from the FIA are completely excluded. We inspected the track 2 months before the start of the race, and those who were responsible for safety complied with all the requirements that the FIA imposes and always followed all the instructions. The last inspection of the track was made on Wednesday, the week before the San Marino Grand Prix, and we didn't find anything to cause concern. The FIA never required a turn to be redone. I haven't received any complaints from drivers regarding this part of the track. Federico Bentinelli. All changes were made only after the approval of the FIA, which never found fault with this turn. Imola, like many other tracks, has changed its configuration after the accident in 1994. Critical situations were created for cars, most likely due to the cancellation of the active suspension. The director of the Autodrome Georgia was later represented at the trial by his nephew, acting as a lawyer. He said that after a long career that began in 1973 as a track inspector, Poggio had to retire after the 1994 race, and added that he was a meticulous performer and never made a mistake, but his duties had a limit, so he expects a full justification. At the end of the discussion, Maurizio Passarini informed the court that the Tamburello turn, despite the concrete being laid in 1989, was still a very dangerous place. The changes made were to include a smooth rise in the departure zone by 30 to 40 cm in accordance with the regulations. After the end of the investigative measures in 1994, the route was reconstructed. The Tamburello and Villeneuve turns from high-speed turns into C-shaped chicanes. Changes will occur on other routes of the championship. Requirements for high-speed corners configuration and departure zones will be tightening. The new requirements will also apply to ways to replace asphalt. The day after the death of Ayrton Senna, the gates of the Williams base in the UK are hung with the fan, flowers and notes dedicated to the Brazilian racer. Outside the gates, the engineers are trying to figure out what happened. According to Adrian Newey, after looking at the available video footage and telemetry data, from which it followed that the force applied to the steering column drops to almost zero, the team first considered that it was the steering malfunction that led to the accident. But then the FIA provided footage with the onboard camera of the Schumacher car. Adrian Newey. In these frames, it was clear that the rear of Ayrton's car had shifted. This wouldn't have happened if the steering column had broken. Michael Schumacher, who was behind the scene at the time of the crash, said after the race, "On the lap after the restart, Ayrton's car looked nervous. It was even worse before the accident. He caught 2 or 3 bumps and lost it." Patrick Head, after the race, was the first to conclude Senna was wrong. "We checked the telemetry. He slightly lifted his foot from the gas pedal just at the point where the asphalt changes. This resulted in a sharp drop in downforce, after which the car went straight." Head's comments are picked up by British publication, releasing them under the heading "Senna made a mistake." But the very next day, the Williams team comes out with a rebuttal, issuing an official statement. The cause of the accident that led to the death of Ayrton Senna hasn't yet been established, and Patrick Hill himself assured everyone that he didn't blame the Brazilian racer for the accident. The version of the driver's error somehow appears in the press. It's usually attributed to the depressed state of Senna, pressure from Schumacher, who won the first two stages, suspicious that Benetton wasn't playing by the rules, and finally, the death of Ratzenberger on the eve of the race. All this worried Senna. However, his new Williams FW16 didn't live up to all expectations and proved difficult to drive. Due to rule changes which took effect from '94, the car lost most of the electronic auxiliary systems, including the active suspension, which allowed the team to dominate in the previous 2 years. When switching to passive suspension, the Williams car turned out to be extremely sensitive and aerodynamically unstable. Ayrton simultaneously complained about understeer and oversteer.
He came to me and Destiny said, the car is really difficult to drive and there's something wrong on the car in the way how the aerodynamics works. We have to improve it. The car is not competitive at the moment. Even so, he managed to put the car in pole position in the beginning of '94. So, but that was him, that was not the car.
The entrance. Why is it supposed to break away? It breaks away more.
Adrian knew. I made a mistake in the aerodynamics of the car. The car had two long side pontoons, the leading edge of which was close to the asphalt, whenever the front of the car was lowered. This created an unfavorable pressure changer under the bottom and led to airflow stall. As a result, the rear diffuser was becoming useless. By Imola, I already understood the problem. I needed a little time to finish the model in the wind tunnel. Then the parts will get on the car and Ayrton will have a car that he deserves. Time didn't give us this chance. New describes the dynamic of Senna's accident by giving the example of racing on American ovals, where drivers sometimes face the problem of rear-wheel drift in high-speed corners. Trying to correct the situation, the driver pulls the steering wheel in the opposite direction. But if the car breaks off too sharply and the rear end then suddenly regains traction on the asphalt, then the car immediately changes direction and goes straight into the wall. Using the Adams Dynamic Simulation computer program, the world's leading automotive industry and design tool, the engineer presents to the court a virtual accident model based on team's theory. The program was entered data provided by Williams concerning the engine and setting of the car, as well as the configuration of the track, the optimal trajectory, driver response, and environmental conditions. Simulation showed that the Tamburello periodically experienced unstable conditions, some of which could be compensated by the control, some of which couldn't. The engineers pointed to a bump inside the corner and claimed that Senna had trouble changing lanes into the Tamburello due to uneven pavement. The driver tried to correct the trajectory of the movement, but eventually moved off the track. We won't be able to see the dynamic model shown in the court. Williams' expert theory is visualized by computer graphic from the National Geographic Channel film. Williams. Turning the steering wheel to the left, Ayrton encountered oversteer, which sent the car towards the inside of the track. Senna reacted and turned the steering wheel the other way. However, his car was shaken again and from 90 degrees to the right of the racing line. After that, Senna decided to keep a straight line, trying desperately to brake. The car changed its trajectory at the moment of the contact with the asphalt. Apparently, due to the loss of about 200 kilograms of aerodynamic load, the car suffered a sudden deviation, too fast to control. The driver found himself on board a system that suddenly became unstable, deviating 9 degrees from the optimal trajectory in Tamburello. The prosecution disputed this reconstruction. Pastorini and CG's lawyers called the simulation arbitrary. Many parameters, including data on the temperature of Senna's tires before the accident, were approximate. A professor appointed as an expert from the University of Genoa reported a significant discrepancy between the simulation data and real telemetry graphs. In addition, the behavior of the car in this model wasn't dependent on the actual position of the steering wheel. Mauro Fornieri is convinced that the steering effort based on telemetry data is in the direction of the turn to left and not in the opposite direction. However, according to the Williams consultants, the change in pressures didn't match the steering angle in degrees. But why didn't the driver try to avoid the collision after braking? Michele Albaretto believes that it's unacceptable for a rider to keep the wheel straight 15 meters from the wall. He definitely had a technical problem. I'm convinced of this, also because the team left Hill in the race, which means they knew what happened. Tommaso Carletti. Based on my experience, I can assure you that no driver will agree to crash into a wall. After braking, he will try to turn the car around. Williams responds that the car kept going straight due to loss of downforce and low traction on the concrete in the safety zone.
So he realized that something strange was on, and so he decided to stop the car. If you are all driving in your car and you feel that your driving wheel is moving, what you believe that something is broken, and what you do, you stop the car. Of course, he was stopping a car from 320 kilometers per hour. That was a different question.
However, the movement of the car directly can be explained by another factor. The footage from the onboard camera of Senna's car cuts off before leaving the track. But in the last moments, the characteristic movement of the wheels can be discerned on it. In the event of the steering failure, they almost immediately stand up straight and move regardless of the position of the steering wheel, as this video from Junior Formulas shows. After the tragedy in Imola, the Automobile Federation was blamed for the ban on active suspension, which previously maintained the height of the cars at the right level, providing optimal ground clearance and the necessary level of downforce. The abandonment of the active suspension, according to many, made the cars potentially dangerous, while the engine retained its power, and in some cases the miner managed to increase the horsepower before the season. The safety of the drivers remained in the background. The riders felt their vulnerability and at the same time the attitude towards it. Andrea De Cesaris, we are trying to talk about the dangers of the condition in which we have to race. This applies to both the condition of the tracks and the cars, but we as drivers at the end of the chain and cannot attract the necessary attention to ourselves. Before the fourth stage of the season in Monaco, the race organized themselves, restoring the activities of the Grand Prix Drivers Association, which Senna called on all at the briefing on the day of his death. The FIA gathered an emergency meeting in Paris 3 days after the events in Imola and already in Monaco announced a number of new rules aimed to reduce downforce and speed of cars. Attention was also paid to the protection of drivers in the cockpit. In mid-90s, high headrests grow around the driver's head. It soon becomes clear that the speed control isn't the most effective method. It's necessary to increase the safety of the rider inside the cars themselves. Contact with the fence or any other objects on the track, as history shows, can occur at completely unexpected angle at any speed. The death of Ayrton Senna and Ratzenberger launched the process of new security systems, gradually from enlarged headrest to hollow and enhanced system. The head protected only by a helmet and held by the neck of the driver, whose shoulders sometimes protruded from the cockpit, had little to do with safety. So, from the very beginning of the team's defense process, Williams has been trying to challenge the investigation conducted by the prosecution experts on the road surface of Imola. At the same time, the lawyers asked the court to provide access to the remains of Senna's car, explaining that two of the three defendants didn't even see them. Only Patrick Head got such an opportunity. In addition, Andrew New's lawyer files an objection that his client was originally questioned as a witness, not as an accused, but Judge Antonio Costanzo dismissed all defense objection. By 1997, Newey had already left Williams and was preparing to move to McLaren due to disagreements with Frank Williams and Patrick Head. In his book, the British engineer in particular recalls how, on the eve of the trial, Patrick Head invited him as the chief designer of the car to take responsibility. In the course of the unfolding trial, Pasarini drew the attention of the court to one more detail. The recording from the onboard camera located on Senna's car breaks off exactly at the moment when his car starts to leave the track, and a little less than 1 second remains before the collision. The prosecutor asked Judge Antonio Costanzo to pay attention to possible deliberate damage to physical evidence and make it clear that he is thinking of filing charges against the management of Formula One. The governing body of the championship at the time was Formula One Constructors Association, abbreviated FOCA, and the president was Bernie Ecclestone. In addition to organizational function, FOCA owned the rights to all video images. Its branch of FOCA TV was engaged in production of video images for television broadcasts. Giancarlo Tomasetti. The fixed cameras on the track belongs to our broadcaster RAI, which is responsible for organizing filming in Imola. The onboard cameras on the cars are installed by FOCA, and it's FOCA who has the exclusive rights to all images related to the Formula One Championship. From the very beginning of the investigation asked for all available video footage from the accident site, but all that was available at the time was the video from the onboard camera of Michael Schumacher, which shows how Senna car leaves the track, as well as footage from the external camera of the television broadcast, capturing the last second. The impact itself was hidden behind a slight bend in the concrete wall, and then we see only its consequences. About a month after the Black Weekend, Brazilian TV Globo reporter Roberto Cabrini received a videotape from Frank Williams with footage taken from the onboard camera mounted on Senna's car. It turns out that Frank himself got it from Bernie Ecclestone just a few days after the race in Imola. The image on the cassette that Cabrini received lasted 4.5 minutes. This gap captures a portion of the time Ayrton followed the safety car and ends at the moment of loss of control. The last frame is replaced by a black screen where there is a little less than 1 second left before the collision. Pasarini only received footage from the onboard camera of Senna's car on September 9. This is typical of the contempt with which the World of Formula One regards this investigation. In May 1997, in the next hearing, the prosecutor said, "I'm sure that the video provided by FOCA is incomplete. Employees of FOCA TV who worked at San Marino Grand Prix in 1994 arrived at the Senna trial." Broadcast director Alan Woolard called the cutoff of the videotape a pure coincidence. 25 cars entered the race at the 1994 San Marino Grand Prix, 30 of them equipped with onboard cameras. The editors in the TV command track could receive a signal from any 4 cameras, being able to switch from one to another, and 3 of them could be used for transmission to network broadcasting. A helicopter flying over the track ensured signal transmission between the participants' cars and the FOCA receiver. They chose the best quality image and decided which images to keep for broadcast. Eddie Baker. The cars had 13 onboard cameras. At the same time, we could receive a signal from 4 cameras, but due to frequency problems, only 3 of them were used. The decision to turn off the camera on Senna's car was made about 10 seconds before it actually turned off. At that moment, there was nothing interesting in front of him. After the decision to turn on and the subsequent delay, the video signal from his car stopped coming. It was at the moment that Senna lost control. FOCA representatives explained to the court the principle of signal transmission during the translator and report that the transition from one car to another takes about 10 seconds. This interval may vary depending on the presence of radio interference. The operation may take longer if there are discussions in the control room about which camera to choose. Alan Woolard. At the beginning of the 7th lap, when Senna's car drove past the pits, the staff decided to change the camera. The image from his car was of no journalistic interest and was of poor quality, so we switched to Katayama's car. Pasarini object. On the original videotape, the image disappeared after the final frame. Then, for 14 seconds, the film is blank, and only short gray lines run across the screen. And then the image from Berger's car appears, not Katayama's. The explanation was that the wrong button has been pressed. FOCA staff said they mistakenly switched to Berger's camera. Alan Woolard. Technician Eddie James directly pressed the button switching the cameras at my command. I don't know, maybe due to technical problems the signal switched to Berger. Failures sometimes occur, the wrong camera or button is turned on. Maurizio Pasarini. A black bar appears on the screen first, and then the image disappears. Why? Eddie Baker. These are typical images of a monitor that is currently being turned on or off. The rest of the image show at the same effect when you turn the cameras of other cars off. Pasarini calls these arguments confusing and downright comical, if not tragic. Maurizio Pasarini. 9 minutes were spent spying on Senna's car. The camera on his car started working at 2 p.m. 7 minutes and 30 seconds and recorded up to 16 minutes and 23 seconds. It would be ridiculous to call it a pure coincidence that FOCA employees decided to change the camera right before the accident. The prosecutor announced that he is ready to conduct an investigative action on suspicions of giving false evidence, arguing that the camera was still working at the time of the crash and the missing footage will be proof the prosecution's case. One of the first to be investigated could be FIA press officer Francesco Vanganese, who allegedly stated early on the French television that he had seen very last second. However, in court, Vanganese himself denied this, saying that he saw only unedited frames, including video from the onboard camera from Schumacher's car. Pasarini hinted that if the investigation is required, it will also take place in relation to Bernie Ecclestone. Prior to this, Bernie communicated with justice only through written statements. The new accusations were followed by a sharp response from the defense. Arresto Dominioni said the FOCA in turn doesn't rule out lawsuits against Pasarini for libel. The prosecutor says that as early as May 9, 1994, he sent Ecclestone a letter in which he asked about the existence of an image from Senna's car, and then repeated his request on June 7th. However, the recording was handed over to investigation only on September 9, 4 months after the first request. Maurizio Pasarini. We were aware of this request. Eddie Baker. No, probably Ecclestone understood this as a request for image of the moment of impact of the car and the wall, which didn't exist. Maurizio Pasarini. You know that Williams asked FOCA to provide a video recording. Eddie Baker. I know there was a request for a record. I remember that copies were given to Williams. This required permission from Ecclestone. If they had asked for a picture of an incident, the answer would probably have been the same. Maurizio Pasarini. In your opinion, was the existing video footage important? Not from a journalist's point of view, not from the point of view of a possible trial. Eddie Baker. No, the recording didn't seem important to us, and besides, it was of poor quality. As a result, no additional investigation followed. The court leaves FOCA employees alone. But if the Ecclestone team says that videotape didn't show anything special because of the break in the record, then the available images still play an important role for the investigation. Pasarini knows about it, but isn't in a hurry to throw a joker. The most important source of information that could tell the investigation what happened was the data contained in the electronic control units installed in their car. There were two in total. One was responsible for the operation of the engine and was installed by renowned minders. The second was an integral work of the Williams team. It helped track the characteristics of the chassis and control the operation of the gearbox. After the ban on active suspension and other electronic assistance systems, onboard computers have fewer functions. Now they were used mainly for data collect and diagnostics, reminiscent of the operation of black boxes. Two-way telemetry was also banned. It was now allowed to transfer data only in one direction, from the machine to the boxes. Along the way, both of these devices collected parameters from a variety of sensors installed in Senna's car. And every time the car passed the pit building, the data collected from the last lap was transmitted by radio signal to the team's receiving antenna and displays on the computers. At this moment, the device's memory was automatically cleared, and the recording of the telemetry information of the new circle began. So, it was before Ayrton's accident. Having received the data of the sixth lap, the registrator began recording the parameters of a new 7th lap, but after 12.8 of a second, Senna's car crashed into the wall. After Ayrton was loaded into a helicopter, the remains of the Williams were taken to the closed box of the FIA. But after 10 minutes, two Williams mechanics came up and asked to let them go to the car. Technical Commissioner Fabrizio Nosca, who has worked for many years on the track in Imola, politely refuses them, and this is prohibited by the rules of the Federation. But two more mechanics soon show up, accompanied by FIA technical delegate Charlie Whiting, who orders Nosca to remove both black boxes from the car. Fabrizio Nosca. Whiting told me that he had received permission from the head of the security of the FIA and then asked to open the box and remove both devices. The Renault box was located behind the cockpit. I took it off with pliers. The Williams block lay behind the radiator near the rear wheel, on the right side of the car. Looks like it was worked. I have seen a lot of such devices and tested them more than once. The boxes were intact, although scratched. Passerini received Renault data logging unit 2 weeks after the investigation began, but it was already empty since the company managed to reuse it on a test bench in Paris in the meantime. The telemetry data with the testimony of the 7th lab was previously copied to a floppy disk and handed over to the investigation along with the registrator. The second unit installed by Williams engineer was taken to justice a month after an accident and, according to the team, was broken and the contact connections were damaged. Williams electronics engineer Simon Coins, who was in charge of uploading the telemetry, said, "I was shocked when I saw our recorder. It was above the gearbox 180 cm from its usual position. 3 or 4 connectors were disconnected or damaged. I took it to garage and tried to connect, but it was useless. I tried to insert a memory card, but also without success." Engineer George Serrano, employed by the Williams as an expert, provided the investigation with new pin connectors. Then, in the course of the trial, it turns out that in order to read the data, a special RAM card is also needed, which would discharge the block's memory in a few seconds. However, the wheel element of the device were hopelessly damaged. All this makes Passerini suspicious. Electronics specialist Marcus Pica, whom the prosecutor brought in as an expert, said, "When we received the Williams data logger, it was completely unreadable. Of the 20 memory chips that it contained, only 2 were damaged, but these 2 were capable of storing data after a power failure." Maurizio Passerini. "It must be a coincidence, but it makes you wonder, what if someone was very jealous of its content?" In March 1997, Charlie Whiting was questioned in the court as to why he violated his own rule to remove control units by handing them over to the Williams team and not to officials. Whiting replied, "It was done out of extreme necessity, so the team could see what was possible cause of the accident and to make sure Damon Hill's second car was safe." Then, in the Italian press, information appears that watching the moment of the accident at the monitor, Patrick had immediately made it clear that the power steering was to blame. No one has confirmed this. but it was known that while waiting on the grid to restart the race, had asked Damon Hill to turn off the power steering. Telling about this, Hill himself will say that he didn't attach much importance to this then, but simply did what he was asked to do. In 1994, the team used electronic hydraulic power steering for the first time, and the first thing Head did was assume that it was the problem and ask that it be turned off on the second car as a precaution. Experts will later say that a possible loss of hydraulic pressure would have simply doubled the power needed to drive the car in Tamburello. Senna would have easily coped with this, but this didn't actually happen, since the pressure in the car's hydraulic system, according to telemetry data, remained normal up to impact, as no errors were found in the electronical component of the system. So, all the investigation had was a few seconds of telemetric information from Renault minders. Transferring them on a floppy disk at first seemed suspicious. You never know what could be thrown there, but gradually the suspicion disappears. Pasarini uses this data as confirmation of the main version of the prosecution. At the same time, the defense of the Williams team interprets them in their own way. Having received telemetry data and video recordings at his disposal, Pasarini turns to electronic specialists for help. He enters into an agreement for digitization and data processing with the large Italian scientific computing center Cinica. Digitized video and images were combined with the telemetry data and shown to the prosecutor in court. The parameters recorded by the Renault black box included engine RPM, speed of the car and its rear wheels, longitudinal and lateral acceleration, gas pedal position, throttle position recorded at different frequencies, gear and clutch position, time and distance traveled since the beginning of a new lap, as well as the steering parameters such as the pressure in its hydraulic system on one side of the steering rack, the pressure difference between the two sides, the system error signal, the target of guidance, and voltage in the steering, showing the amount of twisting force applied to the steering column. All these parameters are available starting from 8 seconds of the 7th lap. There was no information about the operation of the suspension, the position of the brake pedal, and another characteristic of the chassis. It was supposed to contain the recorder of the Williams team, which, as mentioned earlier, turned out to be broken. Data from the previous 6 laps of the race was supposed to be stored on the team's computers, but was never released to the public. The telemetry parameters synchronized with the video frames are displayed at the top of the screen. 7.98 of a second has elapsed since the start of a new lap data recording. During this time, Ayrton overcame 556 meters. His gas pedal is fully pressed. The speed of the car is 298 km per hour. The engine speed is about 13,500 and is gradually increasing. The value of the lateral and longitudinal acceleration, as well as the force applied to the steering column, is minimal. They are close or equal to the values typical for the rectilinear movement of the car. Senna is at the outer edge of the track and is preparing to take his car to the Tamburello. He turns the steering wheel slightly to the left and moves closer to the inside of the track. The position of the steering wheel visually helps to track the yellow button located on it. Behind 9 seconds of a new circle, speed increases to 306 km per hour. The force applied to the steering wheel increases. At the same time, the lateral centrifugal force acting on the car also increases. 9.68. A car drives over a ledge of the first strip of new asphalt. It can be seen how the engine speed jumps up to more than 14,000, and on the next frame the speed of rear wheels also jumps. When the roadness is left behind, the number of RPM is normalized. At the end of the 10 seconds, Senna again takes to the left. The tension in the steering column is minus 23.3. Lateral overload at this point is 2.9 G. After the second strip of a new asphalt, the forces applied to the steering column weaken, and approaching the third lane, Senna turns left again. This time the effort reaches its great value, minus 26 points and 9 tenths. Later overload 2 and 7. Senna enters the third lane of a new asphalt. Noise in the images indicates the first irregularity in this place. 11 whole and 2 tenths of a second. Later force reaches its maximum of 3.6 g. Speed's value bounds. The pressure to the left remains high. New hydrances. The engine speed again jumps above 14,000, and at 11.3 the voltage in the steering column begins to fall. The yellow button of the steering wheel raises. Later force is reduced. Senna eased the pressure on the gas pedal to 67%, 11.4. Senna continues to release the gas pedal. Later overload drops sharply. The car straightens up. At 11.5 seconds, Senna's helmet deviates to the left. The yellow button slides down out of sight. In this case, the voltage in the steering column continues to tend to zero. At this point, Senna had already completely removed his foot from the gas pedal. Engine RPM and speed start to drop. There is no data on the position of the brake pedal, but we can judge the applied braking by the negative value of the longitudinal acceleration. In 0.3 of a second, the deceleration force of the car that has overcome the last unevenness of the third lane along the way increases to 4 whole and 0.3. 11.84. The onboard camera recording cuts off, leaving a little less than 1 second to the concrete wall. The overall picture, including the moment of the accident, Chinica shows in a combined file, combining all available images with telemetry data. In addition to the recording from Senna's onboard camera, there is also a synchronized video from Schumacher's car and the external TV broadcast camera. The file available on the network is of very poor quality. Numerical values make it possible to distinguish only the moment of the sharp drop and parameters at the moment of contact. Now let's turn to the charts. Synchronize them with the picture following the example of Chinica. Yet he recorded from an amateur video camera made by one of the fans from the turn of Tosa. It shows the place of impact, but the quality is very low. In the first graph, we see how the lateral centrifugal force changes as the Senna turns to the left. Between 10.9 and 11.2 seconds, this strength increases rapidly. In a short interval, the speed of the rear wheels increases. According to the Williams team, it was a moment of oversteer and rear wheel slippage. The prosecution says that the G-force at this point corresponded to the force applied to the steering, and the rear wheels that have turned as well as the jump in the speed are a consequence of overcoming bumps. By 11.4 tenths, the lateral strength plummets, starts moving down, and the graphs of longitudinal acceleration. At 11.6, Senna meets the last bump on the first strip of a new asphalt. From the Schumacher camera, at this moment the largest beam of the sparks is visible. Overcoming the bumps, braking increases, and the deceleration increases sharply. 12.16 of a second, the roadway ends. The speed of Senna at this moment is about 240 km per hour. After that, the front wheel enters the gas, and the transition to the safety zone itself creates the effect of a small springboard, and braking becomes ineffective. By laying on a concrete, traction improves, and with it deceleration efficiency. The car continues to bounce slightly, lowering slightly and rising in front of the wall, at the same time rolling over from wheel to wheel. The graph shows bursts of both longitudinal and lateral forces. By the time of contact, Senna managed to reduce the speed of the car to 211 km per hour. In the second set of graphs, the blue line is the position of the gas pedal, measured at a frequency of 10 Hz. Brown with a higher frequency, 50 Hz. At 11.2, the gas pedal isn't at level of 100% for the first time. At 11.3, Senna leaves his leg by 67%, after another tenth by 55%. At 11.5, the gas pedal is fully released. The throttle is at its minimum. Adrian Newey says that Senna hesitated with the gas pedal. The chart shows intermediate wavy lines. Ayrton reacted to the rear end drift, did his best to hold the car, let off the gas a little and reduced the steering angle until after a half a second he realized that he couldn't cope with the situation, then he applied the brakes. On the graph, a complete departure from the gas pedal occurs in a quarter of a second. Given the time to realize the problem and looking at the episode in dynamics, this action looks like an instant one. Adrian Newey. Logic dictates that in the event of a steering failure, he will immediately apply the brakes. Mauro Fornieri believes that Senna trusted his car to the last. Ayrton turned his steering wheel firmly to the left shortly before the accident. If he hadn't, he wouldn't have passed the turn. He realized that the steering wheel on his car wasn't working properly, and after releasing the gas pedal twice, he began to slow down. Alberto Sabatini from the Italian publication Autosprint presented his own reproduction based on telemetry graphs. The blue line indicates the speed at which the car is moving in the Tamburello corner. The red line shows that the throttle is 100% open. This blue line shows the force applied to the steering. We can see that the line indicates that Senna is turning slightly to the left to take the corner. At this point, a little over 11 seconds into the new lap, something happens and the steering returns to zero. This is not Senna's action. This is the steering column breaks and the car becomes uncontrollable. Senna drops the gas by 50% because he sensed a problem. Within 2 tenths, he realized that the problem is serious, takes his foot completely off the gas pedal and brakes desperately. The speed is dropping. The car enters the safety zone, the wheels slow down, the car jumps in a second and a half after the problem occurs, it crashes into a wall. The parameters of the steering, which Sabatini also used for his reproduction, are presented in the first set of graphs. The green line is the pressure of the working fluid measured in the left hydraulic booster cylinder. The pressure in the hydraulic system is always presented and is taken from the common circuit. At rest it seems to be in the range of 350 to 400 psi, but when the steering wheel is turned, for example, to the left, fluid with the help of the gray valve is applied to the right cylinder and presses on the piston and steering rack, helping the driver. Rack moving to the left, act on the tie rods and turn the wheels to the left. In this case, the pressure in the cylinder on the left side drops. A decrease in this value indicates a left turn. At the same time, pressure surges in the cylinders can also be caused by reverse effects. For example, shocks propagating to the system through the wheels. The difference in pressure between the left and right cylinders is displayed as a bright yellow line. The error sensor in the system doesn't tell us anything. The steering target was determined by the gray valve load, its blue line being mostly correlated with the white line showing the amount of torsional force applied to the steering column. We see that the steering tension periodically increases and the pressure in the left cylinder drops as Senna loads the steering column, turning to the left. At 11 seconds, the pressure on the left side drops. More than amount of torsional force on the left reaches its maximum of minus 26.9 newtons per square meter. The load is held for 3 tenths, after which the pressure in the left and right cylinders sharply equalizes. At the same time, the force applied to the rudder falls almost linearly. Williams insists that Senna is adjusting the rear end drift at this point. Prosecution consultant believes that here the driver feels that the steering is faulty. Overcoming the last unevenness of third lane, the pressure drops slightly again. The car pulls a little to the left. This is also shown by the analysis of the trajectory. Perhaps this was due to the attempt to turn, or the impact of bumps on the front wheels and vibration in the front axle and from the onset of hard braking. Subsequent negative bursts of pressure occur at the moment when the car lands on the asphalt. Both surges correspond to the moment of increase in the longitudinal and lateral forces acting on the car. These pulses are reflected on the steering column and are recorded by a torsional force sensor. Were pressure surges caused by wheel impacts or driver hand movements? Mauro Fornieri. At 12.4, the pressure in the system peaks because the wheel bump and steers the strut. Unlike the usual situation, it's the wheels that create the load on the steering and not the efforts of the driver. However, the question of the integrity of the steering remained open. The torsional force sensor detected a small amount of stress, which could be noted if there was some resistance left in the column. The National Geographic Channel movie The Death of Ayrton Senna talks about these figures.
Senna's car had power steering. Because it had power steering, one of the things that they were measuring on the car was the twisting force that he was applying to the steering column. Because they were measuring that at all times, right up to impact, you can look at the information off the car from the black box and see that up to the moment of impact, it wasn't broken.
At first, the computer graph used in the film incorrectly displays the data in dynamics. The time in the background leads the twisting force value by a full second, but towards the end, the passage of the time slows down, and by 12.4 it aligns with the real telemetry indicators. At this point, the force applied to the steering column is minus 7.18 hundredths. And the conclusion sounds, the number minus 7.80 indicates that the column wasn't broken. The value minus 7.18 is here opposite the pressure surge of the working fluid. Two surge at 12.6 is also noted by steering column sensing, but to a lesser extent. In his book, Ayrton Senna said that the team built a special stand at the base to simulate a situation in which shocks from the front wheels would be transmitted to the steering system. Ayrton knew when the car left the track, it overcame an uneven surface, which led to a large pressure surge on the rail. The blow was transferred to the column. When tested on the bench, we were able to transfer torque to the column only if it remained at least somehow intact. Simply put, if the speaker had completely failed, the computer wouldn't register any steering wheel movements at all. These tests are mentioned by engineer George Serrano, brought in by Williams as an expert, but the conditions of these tests were called into question by prosecutor's consultants. The prosecutor in turn made it clear to the court that Senna lost the ability to drive a car and could no longer control the front wheels. It's also noted that in small intervals the front wheel in the video image doesn't turn to the right. Tar marks just in front of the concrete wall also indicate that the car pulls slightly to the right at the last moment. The issue of steering functionality remained a topic of discussion. Most of the experts leaned towards the version of a partial failure of the column, suggesting that the driver, having noticed a problem in his car, would prefer to use the possibility of direct braking to the maximum. At the same time, the condition of the steering column could have deteriorated further at the moment the car landed off the concrete safety zone. The final break, in their opinion, occurred at the moment of hitting the ball. Mauro Forneri, I believe the steering wheel could still be used, but I don't know to what extent. In my opinion, the fatigue cracks continued to grow from wheel impacts that loaded the strut and impacted the strip of material to which the steering wheel was attached, while the steering wheel itself was probably held by the hands of the driver. According to this notion, steering tension could still be registered. However, based on these numbers alone, the Williams team cannot be certain that the steering column was still in good condition at that time. By July 1997, Pasarini is ready to present one of the most important arguments in favor of the main version of the prosecution. The prosecutor shows another video file in court prepared with the help of technical resources. The same video from Senna's onboard camera, the original of which Foca provided at the last moment, was converted to better format and had better quality. And the increased scale of the cockpit made it possible to analyze the movement of the steering wheel. The yellow button located on it helped to track the position of the steering wheel. Each time on turns on the previous laps, it described the correct arc relative to the cockpit wall. This arc was marked with the green marks and was located within a radius of 83 mm from the center point of the steering wheel. The red levers showed the level to which the yellow button dropped immediately before the accident. This red arc, according to Chinika's measurements, was located within a radius of 55 mm from the center of the steering wheel. On the 7th lap of the race, as Senna begins to turn into Tamburello, the yellow button begins to move not only in a circle but also in a vertical plane down. At 9.8, it dropped to the level of red marks 28 mm away from its natural position. You can see how the steering wheel rim is lowered at the same time. For a little over a second, the yellow button oscillates at the bottom of the screen, and the moment Senna loses control, it rises just above the red arc, oscillates about 0.2 feet there, and drops back down, out of sight. At 11.7, the button appears for a moment and disappears again. At this point, Senna is already pressing on brakes. A visible deviation of the yellow button by 28 mm away from its usual position indicates abnormal steering bend immediately before the accident. Michele Alboreto said he was shocked when he saw these images. Now I'm even more convinced that it was a technical problem. It doesn't happen that the steering wheel moves a few centimeters to the sides. It seemed that Pasarini drove the defendants into a dead end, from which it was already impossible to get out. But Williams finds a way to answer. Sometime later, Arresto Dominioni lawyer presented a video film at the team's base in court. On it, David Coulthard, being in the cockpit of 94 model car, demonstrates the movement of the steering wheel with deviation of 15 to 20 mm in different directions. In 1994, Coulthard was Williams' test driver, and after Senna's death, he became team driver and Damon Hill's partner. The video shown in court was accompanied by a written statement in which the court said the movement of the steering wheel on Senna's car before the accident was acceptable. On the FW16, a certain amount of legs in the steering column and steering wheel offset and up to 20 mm to the side was normal. Maurizio Pasarini. This film remains the defendant's commentary. It has the same value as the defendant's words. I wasn't in that place that night. Judge Antonio Constanzi said he will accept evidence if David attends the trial in person. David appears in court only after the end of the championship. The Scot confirms his testimony. The steering movement of Senna's car before the accident was acceptable. On the FW16, a certain amount of steering column and steering wheel flexed with up to 20 mm to the sides was normal. The National Geographic Channel film reiterates the defense's position and explains the reason for such hesitation.
So why did Senna's wheel appear to move up and down inside the car? Well, it was designed that way. This exclusive footage, seen here for the first time in public, shows the amount of vertical wheel movement available in an identical Williams Formula One car. The amount of effort required to deflect it this much is quite considerable, but remember, the driver is being subjected to G-forces in excess of 3 times the force of gravity, and with nothing save the wheel to take the weight of the driver's arms, the design allowed for this much movement.
This statement is clearly trying to mislead the viewer. Probably for the general public it can act as an explanation, but not for you and me. The steering wheel of a racing car is a very precise tool in the hands of the driver. At the same time, it gives the driver feedback, allows you to feel the front wheel and the position of the car on the track. If the steering column was bent like that, then the control accuracy would be low. Maximum control gives only a rigid connection with the machine, and Mauro Fornieri is absolutely right here. No driver would drive a car with the steering in this condition. The analysis of frames from Senna's onboard video camera in the first 2 stages of the season in Brazil and Japan recorded steering fluctuation within 4 to 5 mm. The runs at Imola leading up to the race show the same slight deviation. The movement of yellow button at the start of the safety car race and also after the restart at the beginning of the 6th lap remains within the same limits. However, by the end of the sixth lap, the yellow button was already lowering a little more, deviating by 8 mm or more, and just before the accident, the apparent measured deviation was 2.8 cm. Michele Alboreto: from my many years of experience, I can say that vibration in the steering can occur, but only 2 or 3 mm, not centimeters. I don't want anyone to go to jail, but Senna's memory must be protected. It worries me that people are trying to defend positions that are undefendable. So, the measured oscillation in the steering becomes one of the main arguments in favor of the main version of the prosecution. Unsuccessful modification, well enough components is poor quality. Pasarini concludes that the work was done in a hurry to be in time for San Marino Grand Prix. Williams is trying to prove that the modifications were carried out before the start of the racing season. Arresti Dominioni. Damon Hill's cars used the same steering column modification as Senna's car. The work was carried out qualitatively and slowly, and was completed in March. Senna and Hill ran the first 2 Grand Prix already with these modifications, and there were no problems. During the interrogation of FIA technical delegate Charlie Whiting, the prosecutor questions whether the federation has been notified of the change into the steering column. Charlie Whiting: no, we weren't informed, but we had to check it later. I inspected and improved Senna's car in February and then again in March, but I don't remember those changes. By summer, the defense lawyers are calling the team's engineers as witnesses. Tony Pilcher: the work was completed in early March after Senna asked for changes. New elements were added to the steering column, which had an original length of 905 mm. The assembly of entire assembly included 9 components produced simultaneously in different departments of the Williams plant. The components parts were made of 2 types of compatible steel. After the modifications, the column became a few centimeters longer. On March 10, Williams began assembling 3 of those speakers. The work was done to well-defined standards and took 4 days. After checking for defects, the parts were immediately handed over to the team for installation in time for the start of the Brazilian Grand Prix. Gary Woodward: after every Grand Prix, car parts, including the steering column, are subjected to a correct testing using penetrating fluids. Tests carried out after the second stage in Ida found no defects in Senna's car. Steering column are usually replaced mid-season and are rated for 350,000 cycles. After the second race of the championship, there were 27,000 cycles in the Senna steering column. This is well below the upper safety limit. Maurizio Pasarini: our examination confirms the presence of a clear metallic fatigue. Waiting until your last control check reveals this. Unfortunately, unpredictable and unforeseen events can occur in life. Pasarini refers to the testimony of Stefano Stefanini. In addition to the accident site, he also describes the condition of Senna's car, and noting that the manual plate was welded to the rear suspension, which cracked during the test at Le Castle. Maurizio Pasarini: I'm referring to this testimony not because I want to show that the rear suspension was the cause of the accident, but to show that Formula 1 cars are very complex, and yet when a problem arises, it's solved with the manual plate. In addition, Stefano Stefanini draws attention to the cracked profile of the suspension triangle of the rear left wheel and concludes that the damage of this nature already arose as a result of the car hitting the wall. Stefanini talks about the numerous damages on the right side of the car in great detail and for a long time. Moving on to the cockpit, the inspector talks about the rupture of the left side and cracks in the walls on the right side. He notes that small fragments of the frame at the height of the steering wheel were cut. It turns out that these local changes were to give more space to Senna's hands and were part of an operation to change the position of the steering wheel. At the end, Stefanini goes to the steering column, reporting that it was broken at the distance of 22.5 centimeters from the steering wheel. Pasarini then asked the expert to report on the findings of the metallurgical analysis of the steering column. Tommaso Carletti: First, the studies were carried out in the Military Aerospace Laboratory Practica de Mare, and then several analyses were carried out at the Institute of Metallurgy of the Faculty of Industrial Chemistry of the University of Bologna. The results were the same. Studies have shown that at least 70% of the circumference of the new column element had already been broken due to metal fatigue prior to the accident. The fracture looked typical of a part that was torn in stages. Metal fatigue was caused by a high stress concentration at the point of diameter change. It originated in the upper crescent of the modified section of the column under the action of a downward bending force and then spread along the circumference. According to the results of the study, two in the mirror traces along the fracture, damage from the friction and impacts was visible, indicating friction of the parts due to bending and movement between these two parts. The grades were still being joined, all the compatible steel had different stiffness, and the weld could make the material in the heat-affected zone more brittle. In addition, there were two marks near the crack. Professor Enrico Lanzini also gave explanation to the court about the steering column. It consisted of three parts of different diameters and section, welded together. The modified part broke near the field weld. The radius of the corner in this place was only about 1 mm. The radius is very important for the resistance of the part to fatigue. The smaller it is, the higher stress concentration and the higher the risk of failure. Another factor was aggravated the situation was a sharp change in section combined with two marks. Passarini asked a question that hasn't been answered. Why was it necessary to work with tool on a part leaving such noticeable traces, if at the factory it can be made from scratch on special machine? Then he asked Mauro Fornieri, what was the thickness of the middle section of the column?
Mauro Fornieri, 1.25 mm. Can this thickness be considered adequate? Obviously not, because that's where it broke.
The prosecution called the names of the direct perpetrators. The modified column was built by engineers Alan Young and Gavin Fisher, with Adrian Newey in charge of design and Patrick Head in charge of engineering. Adrian Newey's lawyer's position was that the prosecution didn't properly establish a causal relationship in action of his client. Responsibilities weren't clearly established. According to him, the prosecution should have conducted a more thorough investigation into the direct perpetrators, who disappeared somewhere altogether. Lawyers defended in the interest of the accused answer that each type of work in the team certainly had its own coordinator, but there was also a principle of trust between professionalists, which excluded the examination of details by the chief designer or technical director. As a result, the production was left without proper supervision.
Maurizio Passarini, by recognizing that there is certainly separation of duties in a team like Williams, it's impossible to argue that this separation absolves Head and Newey of responsibility. They couldn't have but know how delicate the job of changing the steering column is, and that it requires precise guidance regarding safety standards. From the Adrian Newey book, How to Build a Car. Now I'm responsible for following that request of Ayrton to lower the steering wheel slightly to avoid him rubbing his knuckles on the inside of the chassis. I'm responsible for giving the drawing office the instruction to lower it by 2 mm, and when they come back to me say that it would then interfere with the FAA cockpit template, I instructed them to reduce the steering column diameter locally by 4 mm. What I didn't do was look at the detailed drawing myself or have a proper checking system in place to make sure that it had been done in a safe manner. It's a simple, well-known law of engineering that to maintain stiffness and strength you have to increase wall thickness, but that wasn't done. The wall thickness wasn't increased. It's also a simple well-known law of engineering that if you have a very sharp corner in a component, it causes an area of a very high stress, and because of that stress, the component will eventually crack and fatigue. And the fatigue crack will propagate eventually around the whole component and cause failure. So, There were two very bad pieces of engineering in the diameter reduction. Urine doesn't indicate the exact timing of the modification of the column in his book, but called this neat a current problem, after finishing the description of the events of the first two stages of the championship and moving on to memories of the San Marino Grand Prix. The film's team's defense strategy is based on the belief that the steering column broke when the car hit the wall, and while the team agreed in part with the metallurgical analysis, it insisted that fatigue cracks didn't affect the integrity of the steering and Senna's ability to keep the car on the track. According to Patrick Head, the nature of the damage to the column is more consistent with a strong impact caused by the impact of the front wheel on the cockpit wall, just opposite the brake. In early June, Damon Hill appears as a witness at the trial. In 1994, the Englishman was Senna's partner, and after the death of the Brazilian, he tried on the role of the first team number. After winning his only title 2 years later in 1996, Hill parted ways with Williams at the end of the season and performed for Rose in 1997. The leader of the reigning Formula One champion asked to remove all the television cameras from the hall. Journalists used post recorders, and the next day the newspapers called his testimony nothing more than amnesia. The Englishman answered most of the questions asked with the phrases, "I don't remember, it was too long ago." Damon confirms that the changes to the steering column also affected his car. As for Senna in the cockpit, there was little room for his hands. In my case, the problem was that there was very little space between me and the steering wheel. Maurizio Passarini, can you specify exactly when the steering column was changed? Damon Hill, I don't know for sure. I think it was before we went to the test, but I can't be sure. Maurizio Passarini, so before the first race of the season? Damon Hill, I can't remember the exact date. It seems to have been done before we started the car. In other words, before it hit the track. Maurizio Passarini, so before the start of the championship. Damon Hill, yeah. Maurizio Passarini, when did you hear about this modification? Damon Hill, I don't know when it was made, so I can't say for sure. I was just given to understand the change had been made. Maurizio Passarini, do you remember who told you this? Damon Hill, no. Maurizio Passarini, did your car have power steering in 1994? Damon Hill, yeah. Maurizio Passarini, did the car have power steering in 1993? Damon Hill, I don't remember. Passarini reminds Hill that Damon testified a month after Imola tragedy that the system was new for the 1994 season. Maurizio Passarini, in the first two races of the season, did you race with or without power steering? Damon Hill, to be honest, I don't remember. Maurizio Passarini, did you get a chance to talk to Senna about the car at the San Marino Grand Prix? Did he complain about the car? I don't remember, Hill answered again. Maurizio Passarini, between the crash and the wall and the restart of the race, did your car undergo any modifications? Damon Hill, no, I don't think so. Maurizio Passarini, why were you asked to turn off the power steering before the restart? Damon Hill, obviously it was supposed to make my car 100% safe. I was asked to turn it off. I didn't ask for a reason and just did what I was told. Judge Antonio Costanzo also asked Hill questions. When did you first see Senna's onboard camera footage, and what condition was it in? Damon Hill, I watched the tape after the race. It was in the same state as it is now. Antonio Costanzo, how can you comment on Senna's accident? Damon Hill, I can also highlight two things when the car looks excessively turned to the left and when the steering wheel is turned back, the way I would expect it to be in a situation where the driver is trying to correct the position. Antonio Costanzo, could low tire pressure or track conditions have affected the situation? Damon Hill, you can separate it, but I didn't have any problems changing the trajectory in Tamburello. As far as I can see, Senna made two unusual corrections in the turn. This may have been due to a drop in tire pressure. Then he crosses exactly the terrain on the track where the bumps were. Leaving the courtroom, Damon Hill said he didn't believe a broken steering column was the likely cause of the crash.
He later repeatedly stated that he believed Senna had made a mistake. In 2004, in his interview with The Times, he said, "No one but me and Ayrton Senna knows what it was like to drive this car, to go through this storm, in that race, that day, on cold tires. I'm convinced that he was mistaken, but many will never believe that he could do it. Why not? He made many mistakes in his career. He always pushed to the limit and could be outside. Often he would rather crash into his opponent than be defeated. No one is to blame that he kept his foot on the gas pedal when he could have lifted." "1997 was the last year of the Williams Championship. Ayrton Senna's team wins their last non-constructor championship, becoming the most successful team in F1 history at that time. And Williams driver Jacques Villeneuve takes the Drivers' Championship title by beating Michael Schumacher at the Jerez circuit on October 26. And already on the 29th, Frank Williams and Patrick Head arrived in Italy for the trial of the Senna case. And Adrian Newey also arrived there. Having built the last championship car for Williams, Newey in his hands. McLaren paid the British engineer including all legal costs. Around first at their hearing, Head and Newey exercised their right not to answer questions in the courtroom, but to submit their statements later in writing. Frank Williams, who arrived late, had to answer to the Italian prosecutor.
What was your role in the team in 1994? I was responsible for the economic aspect, the search for money. Formula One eats up a lot of money. What was the role of Patrick Head and Adrian Newey on the team? Patrick Head was technical director, responsible for the technical part. Adrian Newey was the chief designer and was considered the best in Formula One. Why were changes made to Senna's steering column? When and by whom were decisions about modifications made? Ayrton wanted more space in the cockpit, and it was decided to do so. When exactly I don't remember. After each workout, he made several pages of recommendations to improve the machine. I'm sure that all necessary specialists were involved in the work. Can you specify who these people were? Who specifically I don't know because I don't track every transaction on a daily basis. Did you know what changes were made at that time? No. When did you find out about it? I don't remember. This could be before or after the accident. I remember that Ayrton wasn't happy with the cockpit, but there were many other things that didn't suit him. Senna complained that he couldn't drive? No, he never said he couldn't drive. He had a wonderful car, but with some problems. He said that he would like to have more space in order to be less tired in the second half of the race. Did you do your own research? We tried to find as many facts as possible and to study as many television shots as possible. As a company, we formed the opinion that the steering column remained intact until the moment of impact. We came to this conclusion after studying telemetry, as well as after conducting many simulations. However, we haven't fully formed our own opinion about the causes of the accident. Have you checked the steering column on your other cars since the Imola Grand Prix? Yeah, the column was in perfect order on the spare car, but nevertheless it was decided to find a way to improve a design. So they changed it later? Yeah, other solutions have been found. For what reason? To dispel doubts, our task is to constantly improve the car. Did you have any doubts about Senna's steering column? Certainly, this is why we are here today to understand what happened. Your own experts have confirmed signs of fatigue cracking at the column brake. Did you know about it? I'm sure the plane I flew yesterday also had cracks. I'm not responsible for technical issues that occur and don't monitor every transaction on a daily basis. Many people were involved in the process, and I don't know who exactly can be held responsible in this case. Leaving the courtroom and asked for the question from reporters, Frank Williams said,
In In November 1997, the results of 9 months of hearings are summed up in Imola. All parties to the trial, the prosecution and the defense, make their final statements, summarizing everything that has been said before. Maurizio Passerini, in his motion, again reminds the audience of the main details and expandingly asks the court to drop the charges against 4 of the 6 defendants, namely Frank Williams, Federico Bendinelli, Giorgio Poggia, and Roland Brunciada. According to prosecutor Frank Williams and Bendinelli, they dealt with the administrative side of their work and were not directly responsible for what happened. The guilt of Poggia and Brunciada couldn't be established for certain because it was impossible to accurately answer the question. Senna would have survived if he could slow down a little more speed in the safety zone, or he would have died from a wheel strike anyway. The prosecutor blames the accident on Patrick Head and Adrian Newey, as they were ultimately responsible for the design changes to the car and were responsible for quality control. Passerini said that the driver error must be ruled out, that a failure in the steering column led to the accident. The prosecutor recalled that the result of a study by 2 independent laboratories revealed signs of metal fatigue of the steering column on 3/4 of a circumference. Passerini asks that Head and Newey be found guilty of manslaughter and, given all extenuating circumstances, that the defendants be sentenced to 1 year of probation. Judge Antonio Costanzo lived to consider the verdict, and 3 weeks later, on December 16, 1997, he announced it, acquitting all 6 defendants. The judge's speech took only a couple of minutes. According to Article 530 of the Italian Criminal Code, I accuse the defendants Frank Williams, Patrick Head, and Andrew Newey due to lack of evidence of guilt. I accuse the defendants Federico Bendinelli, George Poggia, and Roland Brunciada since no corpus delicti was found in their actions. I am setting a time limit of 90 days to explain the reason for this decision. The judge promises to give a detailed answer later, but for now the defendants' lawyers didn't hide their delight. Williams Grand Prix Engineering is pleased to confirm that Fred Williams, Patrick Head, and Andrew Newey have been acquitted for all charges. We know that there is a right to appeal, but let's hope that this issue won't be considered again. Roberto Cause. The verdict restores the reputation of Formula One. From now on, it can be considered that auto racing is legally recognized as an incredibly dangerous sport. From the FIA followed a very constrained comment. The Federation was satisfied with the verdict, but refrained from the official comments until the full text of the conclusion was read. Ken Terrell. I, like other team boss, are very pleased that in the end a fair and correct decision was made. If the court had returned a guilty verdict, it would have destroyed motorsport in Italy. Damon Hill. I never doubted the Williams team and their professionalism. If I had even the slightest doubt on this score, I would never have returned to the cockpit after the 1st of May 1994. I know how patient and attentive the whole team was to this process, and I am happy that everything is over for them. This is right, this is a beneficial solution for our sport. Giovanni Carcaterra. Senna's relatives weren't interested in the decision that the court will make. They simply hoped that in the course of the proceeding, the reason that led to the fatal accident will become clear. Leonardo Senna only repeated what he said before. The only culprit for the death of his brother for him is a concrete wall that turned out to be too close to the track, a narrow safety lane, and the absence of a barrier from used tires. Italian journalists and observers were disappointed with the court's verdict. The justice that broke the impenetrability of Formula One 3 years ago is receding. Passerini makes it clear that he intends to seek a reconsideration of the decision regarding Head and Newey, and that he will be looking forward to the judge's report.
Passerini. I need to see what the judge made regarding the broken steering column. Either he considered that there was no criminal liability, or he decided that it didn't cause the accident. In this case, I will be disappointed.
6 months after sentencing on June 15, Judge Antonio Costanzo delivers a full 380-page account on his decision in the Senna case, summarizing his main findings in 7 points. The accident occurred due to a broken steering column. Without this condition, Ayrton Senna wouldn't have left the track at the Tamburello corner. Steering column that broke because it was changed. The accident wasn't caused by any defect in the circuit.
Based on point 3, FIA Inspector Roland Brunsardi and officials Federico Bendinelli and Giorgio Poggi weren't responsible for the accident. Frank Williams wasn't responsible for technical matters in the team and therefore couldn't be responsible for the failure of the steering column. Column modification wasn't a routine operation, but it didn't mean that Patrick Head or Adrian Newey had to personally participate in it. The modification was made by experts that Head and Newey had every right to trust. Even if one or both of the lead engineers were responsible for the decision to change the steering column, this didn't mean that the accident was their fault. They made their decision as carefully as they should have. This meant that none of them showed negligence. By and large, Maurizio Pasarini was satisfied with the court's findings regarding the steering column. An ordinary, more than short clerk managed to prove to the court the main version of the prosecution, which means that the work done by him and the experts involved wasn't in vain. But the prosecutor continues to go to the end, and in October 1998 appeals against the decision of the judge, who found Head and Newey innocent. Pasarini insists they were ultimately responsible for the poor design and manufacture of the steering column modification. However, a year later, in November 1999, the Bologna Court of Appeal upholds the Costanzo verdict based on Article 530 of the Italian Penal Code, when no additional evidence is presented during the appeal process. In March 2002, Ayrton Senna's FW16 chassis was released by the magistrate of Bologna and returned to Tim Williams. Upon arrival in the UK, the remains of the car were destroyed. But the story doesn't end there. Attorney General Rinaldo Razzini is trying to study the motives for the verdict, and in the end finds a contradiction in them. He concludes that the decision of the Court of Appeal was wrong. According to him, it was a mistake to consider the failure of the steering column as a lack of evidence. The accident occurred due to the fact for which no responsibility was assigned. Razzini is appealing the latest decision of the Court of Appeal to Italy's Supreme Court of Cassation. In January 2003, the Court of Last Instance cited significant errors in the 1999 Court of Appeal, overturning Head and Newey's acquittals. In April 2004, 10 years after Senna's death, he announced the start of the second appeal process. The defense lawyers are discouraged, but still declare that they are ready to once again prove their case and provide all possible assistance to justice. Roberto Causa: essentially doesn't change anything for us. We won the previous two trials and don't understand why we should be afraid to lose in the third one. New hearings resume only after a year. In May 2005, Razzini read out all the articles of the indictment once again in order to exclude other hypotheses about the cause of the accident and establish the responsibility of those who should have been responsible for the work on changing the steering column. The Attorney General asked to take into account the exclusivity of the operation to modify this particular part. Rinaldo Razzini: intervention in the design and development of such an important element as a steering column should have included responsibility standards that were ultimately missed. Razzini says that in the recommendation of Maurizio Pasarini, who asked for 1 year suspending sentence for the accused, all mitigating circumstances were already taken into account. Razzini pays tribute to Pasarini, noting that he had led the investigation in the right direction. Therefore, the guilt of the defendants must be recognized, and the case closed due to expiration of the statute of limitations. The defense lawyers also had their say here, urging the court to remove any doubts and deliver verdicts of innocence to their clients. Arresto Dominioni said that the accident is solely due to the uneven track.
This, according to him, could damage the column, which finally broke as a result of the collision. The Mignone recalled the computer reconstruction of the accident, which Pasarini didn't accept, and also that the judge found no evidence of the defendant's guilt at the first trial. The prosecutor replies that, if necessary, he is ready to find this evidence and establish the degree of responsibility for each. On May 27, 2005, Chief Justice Lucio Di Razza, by his decision, dismisses the charge against Adrian Newey and with the warning, "Didn't commit the act because he wasn't responsible for the technical part," and finds Patrick Head guilty of the release control, freeing him from punishment due to the expiration of the statute of limitations. Subsequent petitions by Head, who asked for full acquittal for himself, were rejected, and on April 14, 2007, the Supreme Court of Cassation of Italy put a final end to this case. Patrick Head doesn't receive a sentence, as the statute of limitation for manslaughter in Italy is 7.5 years. The final verdict was handed down 13 years after the disaster. The final decision of the Supreme Court no longer caused a great public reaction. Long periods of appeal reduced interest in the protest. Most sources on this topic still recall only the decision of the first court. The lawsuit couldn't bring the Brazilian driver back to life. This is clear. But firstly, it was an attempt to get closer to the truth and pay tribute to his memory. And secondly, it made everyone think about responsibility. Ayrton, at the cost of his life, provided a service to all motorsports. The International Automobile Federation was able to draw right conclusions. The impossibility of existing according to the old rules in the Formula One made it possible to realize the death of the driver just such a magnitude as Ayrton Senna. As for Williams' team, it's clear that none of the accused wanted to go down in history as a culprit of Senna's death. And each participant in this process had its own truth. And when, on the one hand, they say that everyone is interested in fighting the cause, and on the other hand, they show that the bending of the steering column is normal, then all the other arguments of the Formula One team are somewhat depreciated. There are certainly untold stories in the Senna case, but this mostly refers not so much to the accident itself, but to the events that took place after it. In 2010, Frank Williams stepped down as the chairman of Williams Grand Prix Engineering, which he founded, and later handed over his board seat to his daughter Claire. In 2020, the Williams family sold the team to American investors, and at the end of 2021, Sir Frank Williams passed away. Adrian, having worked at McLaren until the end of 2005, joined the Red Bull team, in which he works to this day. The British engineer is considered one of the most successful designers in the history of Formula One. Patrick Head stepped down as a technical director in 2004 and led the board of the Williams team at the end of 2011. In recent years, he has chaired the FIA Safety Commission. Under his leadership, in particular the conclusion of the research team regarding the circumstances of the incident that led to the death of the Formula 2 pilot Anthony Hubert, as well as the accident of Romain Grosjean, were considered and approved.
You should know that by being a racing driver, you are under risk all the time. And by being a racing driver means you are racing with other people. And if you no longer go for a gap that exists, you're no longer a racing driver.